Today, Evan Shapiro is an Emmy and Peabody award-winning producer of TV and films like Portlandia, This Film Is Not Rated, Please Like Me, etc., etc. But that's not the reason he's on a podcast about digital advertising and big tech. Evan Shapiro is also the unofficial cartographer of the media universe, and his depiction of the media on a map is essentially used by analyst professionals and students alike. I especially like his newsletter, Media War and Peace, where I think he has very incisive and unique points of view on the future of the media industry. I am absolutely certain that this is going to be a lot of fun. Watch the full podcast on YouTube. Welcome to the Lost Party Cookie, the podcast where we discuss the future of digital advertising, big tech, and marketing for those in tech but are not techies. I'm your host, Sandeep Ramesh, ad sales leader, marketer, and investor. All right, welcome, Evan, to the Lost Party Cookie podcast. We are so happy to have you here. I have to start with a confession. I've been a big fan of your media maps. In fact, I started watching all of your content after I saw your media maps. I know about your keynotes, and I know about all the work you've been doing on the media industry. What I did not know was your life as a filmmaker, an Emmy award-winning filmmaker, no less, before your avatar as a media analyst, so to speak. Could you take us back to that life and tell us how you did the transition?
I was very fortunate to be the head of IFC and Sundance Channel for a number of years. And in that role, I was also the head of greenlighting original content. And in that role, I chose to be an active executive producer and producer in a lot of projects that the company was producing at the time. So everything from This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which is a documentary about the MPAA that I named and had an active role in creative producing, to Portlandia, which is a show that we produced for IFC with Fred Armisen and Carrie Brownstein and Lauren Michaels. That, again, I'm the reason it took place in Portland. So I like to think I had a very active creative role in making that show what it was. But I also worked on a show called Brick City about Newark, New Jersey, and Cory Booker while he was mayor there. A lot of fun stuff. And then I went on to work at Participant Media, where I won an Emmy for producing a show called Hit Record with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and a bunch of other stuff like Please Like Me. And then at NBC, I produced a show called Harmon Quest with Dan Harmon, My Brother and Me, Shrink, which is a really fun show, a bunch of other things. So yeah, I was really fortunate to have this role where I was the decider on what was getting greenlit, but I was also able to sit on both sides and play the right brain, left brain game of being the business head, but also working with the artists to create the content themselves.
Well, that's one hell of a story. But I want to rewind a little bit. Everyone has a childhood story. I want to ask you about your childhood, and this is a segment we do with everyone actually. One incident or anecdote or story from your childhood that you thought impacted the way you thought about the world and sort of got you where you are right now, or had a lasting impact on you.
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to look at from my childhood that is still resonating today. I was basically raised by the television set. My parents divorced when I was relatively young. I was really the first latchkey kid. I was the first Sesame Street kid. Not the first, but my generation were the first Sesame Street kids. I was one of the first latchkey kids, one of the first kids in our neighborhood to go through a divorce. And then my mom had to go to work while she was raising two young boys. And so when I would come home from school, rather than doing my homework or doing anything else, I just sat and watched tons and tons of television. Star Trek, the Brady Bunch, everything, just all this great content from the 60s and 70s. But if there's one real moment that really changed the trajectory of how I thought about, frankly, who I was in the world and where I might go. In the early 80s, there was this Broadway show called Nicholas Nickleby. It was a 2-hour two night 7 hour show. You had to go twice. You had to go one night and the next night, or you could see it, matinee and evening. And then for some reason, against all odds, and it would never happen today, NBC decided to film it and put it on over the course of 2 nights in primetime television. And I watched it alone in my living room, just absolutely mesmerized. I was kind of into theater at the time, but it was, kind of just an interest. And then I saw this just, Charles Dickens piece with all these actors, including Roger Rees, rest in peace, who just played multiple roles, and just a magical piece of stagecraft, but then also filmed and then broadcast on television. And the idea that something so transformative and unusual could be beamed into people's homes, and watched by a 13-year-old in their living room, just really, it just changed the way I thought about media and my place in the world. And it really set me on this path from that moment, without question, to work in some sort of entertainment. I never really wanted anything else. There was no second choice ever. And so that's probably, I point back to that as a real major turning point in the trajectory of my career and my life.
Most people don't on who born and brought up in the US don't understand the impact that, or the power, the soft power that US has in terms of content. I grew up in India. In the 90s, we went from one television network or one television channel to about 50 or 60 in that period, and then I grew up on a diet of American shows that are not even famous in the US. They're just like shows that they got the rights for, things like Small Wonder. These are super hit shows outside, but not many people even know about them in the US. So it's surprising, but it has a huge role to play in easing American culture into people's living rooms. Where you wouldn't even think of.
Yeah, you look at Matthew Perry, who just passed away over the weekend, and the worldwide impact that one character had. Just, I mean, again, on the planet, he basically, that one character invented modern sarcasm. It's not that Matthew Perry or the writers on Friends invented sarcasm. That's obviously not true. But the way we talk about sarcasm and the intonation of today's modern sarcasm was truly invented by that character and that actor. And to this day, he has this lasting impact globally that is just remarkable.
Friends is a bigger hit outside of the US. I know it's a big hit in the US,
Huge hit here.
but Friends is a bigger hit outside the US because this warm, fuzzy concept of friends hanging out is not that American as much as it is for other cultures. So it's very easy to think of this as natural in a place like India, where something like Seinfeld would never
Right.
work as well.
Right.
But Friends has such universal appeal; it appeals to every culture, and it's so aspirational. So
Yeah, and I've met probably at least a dozen people I know from other countries who said that's how I learned to speak English, is from that.
amazing. That's a great segue. I want to speak about your career as well. This really amazing career arc that you have. But just if I were to ask you one piece of unconventional advice, you had an unconventional career, but one piece of unconventional advice you have for young folks that they wouldn't otherwise hear from everyone, what would that be?
I think not enough emphasis is put upon being happy. I think, getting ahead, making money, advancing your career, titles and pay, and the corner office and responsibility, are all, really, especially in the Western world. I can't speak to India, but in most of the world, it is those are the high priorities. And I think if there's anything my career has taught me, but also the last 5 years has taught the world, is that not enough focus is put on your personal satisfaction, your personal happiness, your personal peace of mind over the, striving to be number one. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm a hard worker, I'm a workaholic. I work too much. Everybody, everyone I know who knows me well would say that. Um, but on the flip side, the more I'm able to control my own happiness by my own hand, the more satisfying the work is. And I'm not saying that being happy will make you money, but being happy definitely makes the money less important. And by the way, that means like living where you want to live and working at companies that value you and not working for assholes and, not doing things on a daily basis that upset you. And I'm not a big believer in snowflake culture and like you're not going to have to do the things that you don't like. Everybody has to pay their taxes. Everybody has to fill out their expense reports. Everybody has a boss to answer to. Even me, I have clients that I have to answer to. But I think the quest for personal satisfaction should be driven by how happy you think you're going to be, and less by the title you'll find on your business card or the money you're going to make, because those things ultimately are traditionally ephemeral. And again, look at the chaos in the media ecosystem. With this, more people have been laid off in media this year than in any year that it's ever been measured. And a lot of these people have worked for these companies for decades. And the idea that you're going to invest all this worth and value into the name and title on your business card, and that's going to be reciprocated from the company, who is ultimately just going to lay you off when they need to. I just think, your own happiness and your own satisfaction should be the number one criteria for what you do in life.
Yeah, if there's one thing I want to tell, I have a 1 year old son, but there's one thing I want to make sure that he doesn't grow up with. It is believing that there is a dream college or a dream company. I don't want his dream to be tied up to a company or a college. So that is definitely a bubble that has been burst for sure. We have to get as much of your insight as possible. So let's get into the meat of things here, and let's get this podcast going. We cannot start, or we cannot go further without talking about your amazing media map. I'd love if you want to present it here, but
Sure.
just take us through it. How did you come up with it, and how has it been since the time everyone's been talking about it?
Um,
This
it's
map has this map has had a journey, so you can take us through this.
it has had a journey. It's interesting. I actually started making this map for my classes at NYU and Fordham, because my class, I don't teach case study classes. I don't teach history classes. I teach what's happening in media in real time. And so I really wanted a tool that demonstrated the changing evolution of media as it was happening, as it was morphing. So about 4 years ago, I sat down and Recode actually had a map of the media universe, which was much more simplistic and less detailed, and barely included the what I call $1 trillion Death Stars on the map. And it was I in order to use it in class, I kept having to like alter it and change it and rewrite it. So one day I just sat down and started from scratch with a blank PowerPoint slide and just created this map. And that was the first time anyone had ever really put these massive big tech companies on a chart, scaled to the size of their financial power relative to old world media or traditional media, scaled to the relative power of their financial assets. And I sent it to my friend Dade Hayes, who's a business editor at Deadline. And he's like, what the fuck is this? And he published it. And it just really exploded from that point forward. And I've updated it basically at least a couple of times a month since then, by hand in PowerPoint. It's really taken a metamorphosis. I used to have just parts of the $1 trillion Death Stars on there because I thought they were too big to include. And then, frankly, I just broke PowerPoint. I mean, the way I make this is it's a little painstaking. It's getting easier over time now that I have a team to help me do it a little bit. They compile the data, but really, what I wanted to do was make a touchstone for the industry, that couldn't be argued with, that you couldn't have an opinion on. Look, I get things wrong on this map and people correct it, and I'm readily eager to admit those mistakes. But the x-axis on this map is the market capitalization of the companies themselves, based on mostly public or publicly published information. And so when you look at the scale of the map, you cannot argue with where the gravitational pull immediately tells you where it's going. It's very easy to see what's happening here. Back in 4 years ago, the intention was not to make a prediction that big tech was going to take over media. It was to announce that it had already happened. That by dint of the power of the smartphone, by dint of the power of the App Store and Google Play, by dint of the power of YouTube and Amazon's reach, that big tech had really already reoriented the gravitational center of the media universe around themselves. And frankly, at that point, already around the consumer and not around Hollywood or any individual format or form of media itself. And in reality, I was trying, and I only know this in retrospect because I wasn't able to kind of articulate it then. But in retrospect, I was basically announcing we had entered a new era of media. The last era of media really ended when Disney went direct to consumer in 2019, and gained 10 million subscribers in the first month. And in less than 3 years, overtook Netflix in total subscribers globally, and then fired their CEO 90 days after that happened. We went from the top down oligarchy of media to the user centric era of media. Amazon is built around the user, Apple is built around the user, Microsoft is built around the user, Meta to a certain extent is built around the user. These companies have always put the user and the community at the center. Doesn't mean that they don't exploit those users, but they put the needs and behaviors of the users at the center of their operations, as opposed to the kind of one-way, top-down, ivory tower ecosystem that is represented by traditional media, which also includes Netflix, by the way. And so this map was meant not to be a prediction, but a weather map. And the evolution of it over the time has really been the kind of Doppler radar of what's going on inside the ecosystem.
Amazing. I think we've discussed this before. The only argument that one could have over here is this concept of media soft power, and you could argue that let's say Rupert Murdoch exerts more influence than Sundar Pichai, or do you think he does? Or the people that run, whoever it is that runs the New York Times, have slightly more soft power than Mark Zuckerberg.
I disagree. I will have to disagree with that. I mean,
Right.
there are viewers of Fox News, there are readers in the New York Times, but those are expressly American enterprises. Although Rupert's empire extends around the rest of the world, and so I would argue that the algorithm of Instagram and the gatekeeper power of Apple and YouTube and Google, 97% of search on the planet Earth. So Google controls how we think about things because, it's not search for search sake. There's definitely a biased algorithm at the heart of it. Microsoft's ownership of not just Office, but also Minecraft, which is played by 60% of the world's population under the age of 12, or between the ages of 8 and 15. I do have to beg to differ. There's no question that Fox and Rupert Murdoch's empire and the New York Times and the Daily Mail, they control a decent amount of soft power. But I would argue that that's still at the whim and beck and call of these major big tech Death Stars who control, two companies control 100% of access to smartphones on the planet Earth. It's hard to
We're
argue.
going to talk about those two companies soon, but I
Yeah, yeah.
have
It's really hard to
not.
argue with that level of influence.
Let's dive deeper into big tech, for sure. And this is one of my favorite questions because it gets the most wide ranging discussion on big tech. Hypothetically, and I know you've discussed this before in one of your talks, but hypothetically, if you had $100 to invest in what you call magma, the top five: Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and yeah, if those top five, if you had $100 to invest, and let's assume they're all fairly priced, how would you apportion the $100? Which gives me an insight into what you think about all of these companies and their future.
I mean, I actually think Google is greatly underpriced right now. So
Yeah.
I might put most of it there, or a good portion of it there. I just think they're going to face some regulation, so we'll see what happens there. But just their Google TV platform, YouTube as the dominant video player on the planet, it's the number one television. It's the number one video platform. We all know that. Google is the number one advertising platform on the planet. Um, but YouTube is the number one connected television channel on the planet Earth right now. And I don't think people completely appreciate the level of influence that has. So I would actually argue that Google, Alphabet, and Amazon are both, relative to Apple and Microsoft, pretty well undervalued. I would also add Nvidia to the top $1 trillion Death Stars. I think they're kind of at the peak of their valuation for a minute, but I think they'll make moves in the next couple of years that would value them, in the $2 trillion range. 2 years ago I said they would reach $1 trillion. They were at, I think, 400 or 500 billion at that time. They are now worth $1 trillion. I think they will reach $2 trillion. I think AI will be a big part of that. But I think as they move into other sectors, because they're going to, they have all this cash on hand, I think they would be ones to watch. Not to say that you shouldn't invest in Microsoft and Apple, but they're both worth almost $3 trillion right now. And I don't know that they're undervalued at all. That said, every time I think I'm going to bet against Apple, they prove me wrong. But they've been up and down around the same valuation for almost 2 years. Whereas I think Google and Amazon, once they get through whatever regulatory hurdles in the next 18 months that they may or may not face, and they'll settle those. I think they're both $2 trillion companies. So that means they're both kind of almost double their market capitalizations over the next 18 months. And I think they're just excellent bets.
As a former Googler and as someone who has a lot of RSUs in Google, I hope you're right. But double clicking on that particular regulatory hurdle, which probably is one of the biggest reasons why the stock is where it is, I want to talk about this DOJ case versus Google, right? So, and I want to paint a picture. You know this, but I want to paint a picture to the viewers. Is that Google has spent over the last decade over $120 billion in trying to make Google search the default on all iPhones and Safari. So right now they're probably about $20 billion every year that goes from Google to Apple. This is one third of Google's profits, one fourth of Apple's profits. So the two most influential companies in the world are essentially bartering.
Colluding.
Um, yeah, I'm not the one saying that. Essentially, bartering
The
huge
Justice
amount
Department.
of influence and a huge amount of money. So that's the context. So you know what the case is about. My question to you is that, well, clearly you answered this. My question to you was that do you think this is monopolistic behavior practices? And two, if you think it is, why isn't the stock market factoring in any change in these humongous profits that are being allocated from X to Y? These are
Well,
huge
I
numbers.
mean, but when you look at it, yeah, no, it's a good question. Um, it's a great question. I don't know that they haven't. I don't know that everybody thinks that's a enormously sustainable deal. And I
One
think
fourth of Apple's profits could go away in a flash, and That's huge for a stock, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's necessarily going to happen.
Yeah.
Meaning, I think there'll be a settlement of sorts, and I don't know that Google's going to be prevented from doing a commercial deal with Apple. I just think that Apple is going to have to change the way that bidding structure works. So Apple may build their own default search, using Safari. Although if you've ever used Safari, it's not that great. I mean, Apple's not a great software maker,
Well,
and never.
forget about what do you think is going to happen. I want your POV on whether you think this is
Well,
a
I
fair
think it's
game
the
or
same thing
not.
that's going to happen. I think it's the same thing that's going to happen in the App Store case between Epic and Apple. I think ultimately it'll be decided that people are going to have to that a more democratic or less anti-competitive process will have to be employed. But I don't know that Google's going to lose that battle. Meaning, I think it'll be open to the open market. I think Apple will be forced to offer other forms of search. But Sandeep, name another search engine. I mean,
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I understand that.
McDonald's is number one because people love McDonald's and there's a comfort to it. Starbucks is number one because Starbucks is number one and there's a comfort to it. And so, to a certain extent, the damage has already been done. It's a little late in the game to be trying to correct here. And again, it goes to the App Store stuff. I think Apple, and they already have, has begun allowing alternative pay methods in the App Store. Google Play has already done that. I think that'll hurt them. So maybe 10% of their App Store tax will go away, 15% of it. But I don't think 100% of it is going to go away. And nor do I think that everybody's going to migrate to alternative. It's a pain in the ass to process payments. It's a very friction filled filter. It's the same thing. So perhaps Google will not be able to just have to pay Apple. Perhaps they're going to have to advertise in the App Store. Well, if they spend that same amount of money in the App Store advertising Google as a search engine, they're going to have just as disproportionate a competitive disadvantage as Apple as they do now, where they just pay Apple directly to have the default thing. And I think that's likely the outcome here is that they'll be prohibited from making a direct deal, but Google and the rest, DuckDuckGo and Bing and Firefox will all be allowed to advertise in the App Store at a competitive open market retail advertising level. But I still think Google wins that because they're worth $1.5 billion, trillion dollars, sorry, and nobody else has. Maybe Microsoft starts to port. I mean, but they could do that now. If Microsoft really took Bing seriously, they would have been more competitive a lot longer ago. And they would have reached out to Apple to try to make a competitive deal. Now, the court case says that Apple rejected them. That's pretty self-serving of Microsoft to say in court. But were they really prepared to spend $21 billion a year, becoming on Bing, which is a business that's so not core to them, that they just, their whole investment in OpenAI was about getting Bing 2% more share of voice in search, 2%. That's what the model, that's how I don't know where that comes from. 2% more. That's the new iOS has this weird camera read thing. So I think, I look at it like the Microsoft antitrust case from 20 years ago. These things rarely operate the way that the intended consequences of antitrust legislation and suits and moves by the FTC rarely come out, even when the FTC and Justice Department wins, rarely turn out exactly as they intended.
Yeah, I mean the arguments, and I don't want to belabor this point, but the arguments in the case have been more interesting than the case itself
Yeah,
because you have Satya Nadella coming in and saying we are a poor, small search engine that's trying to struggle and keep pace with Google, and
whatever.
you have Google saying, "Hey, if you guys were so good, how come you don't even have a great share in Internet Explorer where you're the default? So it's been nice to see the arguments in this case. I don't know about the case itself, and you're probably right.
Yeah,
This probably going to
Microsoft is not really the honest broker. I understand where they're coming from. Mozilla and others have a much stronger case to make. But yeah, Microsoft, it's hard to listen to them with a straight face as they sit there and go, "Poor us, the second most valuable company in the history of mankind."
it's hard to hear those arguments. But thank you about to share your thoughts about this. I want to go into an area of expertise of yours that you're probably far more equipped to answer than even I am or anyone else. Is the future of television, and I know you've spoken about a lot about this. And this is from an outsider's perspective. I've never worked in the television industry, but in the U.S., it looks like we went from a situation where there was ad-supported linear television, there was appointment viewing. Two, we went through a lot of flux. Two, today, if you look at Fast and its growth, it's literally ad-supported linear television with which is not appointment viewing, which is appointment viewing, but it feels like we've just gone back in time, except that the medium of distribution has changed from cable to the internet. Have consumers benefited at all? Like, has their experience changed at all in the last 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, the experience has become, I mean, yeah, the quality of television and the amount of television available to the consumer both are better. There's more television, and generally speaking, it's much better because in the era of subscription driven streaming, a show did not have to be mass market to be valuable. It's very hard to believe that a show like Queen's Gambit or BoJack Horseman or Fleabag or some of these other shows would have made it to old school cable television in the method that they did. Squid Game from South Korea would have found even an opportunity to find an audience in the United States, or Money Heist, or a lot of these other shows. And so the access to the kind of television that consumers have now and the amount of it is substantially better overall than it's been. The problem is, so you have to go back to before the streaming wars really took off and look at what was happening to cable television. I think there's a misperception that the cable bundle was the thing protecting television before the streaming wars began. And that's not entirely true. It was for a certain period of time prior to the turn of the century, but by the turn of the century, video subscriptions on pay TV were basically a break-even proposition for the cable companies. Most of their money in the aughts and moving forward through the teens of the 21st century came from the triple play, the combination of the video bundle, the broadband, and telephony. And those extra bonus profits, broadband was pure profit. Telephony was pure profit because they didn't need to dig another pipe. And really didn't have to provide that much more service to almost triple the income that they were taking in. And that three hooked lifestyle bundle into the home really lowered churn dramatically, like just astronomically. And so that triple play really allowed the cable companies to overpay for licensing fees for things like ESPN and CNN and all these other suite of channels, and pay fees that weren't necessarily merited for channels like IFC and Sundance Channel, because they were bundled into like AMC's suite or Discovery's suite of channels or Disney's suite of channels. Then when the video bundle started to disintegrate and landlines became irrelevant, the whole triple play started to disintegrate, and that's where the protected shell came off. In the move to ad-free premium streaming, the disruptors did what the disruptors do. They just lowered the price of entry for the consumers so low that it became irrational not to subscribe to it. You got all this content from the cable providers whenever you wanted, wherever you wanted, on demand, without ads for $8. And the very same publishers who were protected by the triple play decided, well, yeah, let's enable this. Let's enable this great disruptor. And that's what accelerated the destruction of the cable bundle and the television ecosystem as we knew it. Then everyone chased Netflix down the rabbit hole without understanding that Netflix's business model was not really sustainable. And then Fast came along, which is not appointment viewing in any way, shape, or form, but is free and ad supported. So we went from everything must be ad free and premium to now everything has to have ads and be free. And now the experience for the consumer is this confusing labyrinth, Tower of Babel, undiscoverable, undecipherable paradox of choice, which is a really unpleasant experience. I ask people this all the time. Do you log on to one service, not find something to watch, log on to another service, not find something to watch, and then just give up and wind up watching nothing? And a lot of people in the audiences I talk to raise their hands. What's also happening now is I ask people, hey, do you ever sign up for a premium streaming service, binge the heck out of something, and then cancel before the next billing cycle? Most of the audience raises their hand. So you've got this very untethered, unbundled ecosystem with free and paid all streaming through the same connected television device. And the business models are falling apart. Subscription isn't adding up to what they're losing. The advertising business isn't adding up to what they're losing. And combined, they're still not adding up to the things that they've lost. In the meantime, you've got Apple creating television properties at a loss. You've got Amazon creating television properties at a loss. You've got Google buying NFL Sunday Ticket at a loss so that they can build a larger lifestyle bundle that looks a lot like the triple play, because it gives you all these things that you need in one place. So what we're finding is the traditional players are now just channels, and I include Netflix in this. They're just channels. They're just TV channels. And the big tech Death Stars are recreating what Comcast has created and still has a pretty good enterprise built around. And they're going to be the new gatekeepers for what we know as television. I think ultimately we're not back where we were because it's just more confusing and discovery is even harder than it was. IFC would not have succeeded in any way, shape, or form if it wasn't sitting next to AMC. The only reason people found IFC is because they were clicking through the channel and they found IFC. That is completely lost now. And so that's a real problem for smaller brands, smaller shows. And so what I think you're going to see is you're seeing it, a rebundling of all of this into a suite of services. Amazon Channels is a version of this to a certain extent. YouTube, is becoming a version of this. And I think you're going to see us return to a bundle of channels where discovery is much more, and those channels will be streaming services and traditional players, but inside the Apple ecosystem, inside the Google ecosystem, inside the Amazon ecosystem, inside the NVIDIA ecosystem, inside the Microsoft ecosystem. Those last two aren't into TV yet, but they will be. And when they do, they're gonna create discovery the way we used to be able to rely on a provider to help curate our discovery. So yes and no. We're going back to where we are. We're in the chaos stage of that. And I think over the next 36 months to 60 months, you're going to see kind of a return to what worked really well, which was the bundle. It just, it was just inconvenient because I couldn't stream it and it was way overpriced, which was a problem as well.
What you're saying and what you're seeing is literally a business truth that it is probably not possible to run a standalone video business. It needs to be bundled and part of a larger business.
So I call this the hierarchy of feeds, and it's not video; it's all feeds. And this is based on a study that Hub Research did about what people say is their must-have media. And this is them, both for people over 35 and under 35. Podcasts, free video, so audio, premium video, free video, social media, gaming for both constituencies. And reading is much more of an over 35 need. But these are the hierarchy of feeds, the itches that every consumer is looking to scratch every day when they wake up and they pick up that glass. And again, I think there's this, you can't operate, you said this, it's impossible to operate a standalone video business as a real going entity in the world. And I think that what Hollywood and the traditional media players fail to realize is that was true before the streaming wars. All of their
Yeah,
channels were being protected by this triple play of revenue that overpriced video as the main set, as the focal point of it, but then drove all of the revenues from broadband and telephone. It's the same thing now, except it's Apple and iPhones, and it's Amazon and shopping, and it's Google and search. These companies are going to use their other parts of their business to fund their video business, traditionally at a loss, so that they can keep the consumer inside their ecosystem for more time, sell them more products, collect more data, and generate more advertising revenue. That is where we're at. By the way, we were kind of there already. Now it's just a different version of it. So for people who are in the publishing business, people who are putting out content, if you don't understand where you fit at each level of this hierarchy of feeds, you're going to be usurped and replaced by companies who do. One of the best examples I can give you, and this is going to sound really odd, but it's a company you mentioned earlier, is the New York Times. Reading, we all understand that. They're a top 4 podcaster in America, maybe on the planet. They have a ton of free video. They have a ton of premium video that they sell to Hulu and to other players. They're a top gaming company. The New York
I
Times
did
is a
not know that.
top gaming company, and they have a major presence on social media. They have created a lifestyle bundle. By the way, Amazon is the perfect example of this. Google is building the example of this. Apple is building this hierarchy. Microsoft is on their way. Meta doesn't really have it as much as they should, and that's why I think they're capped at where they're going to be in the next in the next era or this era of media, unless they make acquisitions to enter some of these other verticals.
So that leaves me. It fits this what you're talking about. This perfectly fits, and I think this glaringly obvious in hindsight piece of the fact that you never made money on just video
I mean,
is phenomenal.
there was a period in the '90s where that was true. But then at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century, that ceased to be true. And when big tech entered the ecosystem, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google, they changed the game forever. And it took 20 years for it to come completely to fruition. But at the beginning of this decade, that's when it all switched. And the user now dictates how their own bundle of services works. And they use big tech as the mechanism to do that.
TikTok's probably more. I know they're not public yet. They're probably slightly more profitable. But where does that leave Netflix? Because the cost of acquisition is close to one third of their overall revenue, and then how do they build a sustainable business in the future?
Well, they'll sell. I mean,
Microsoft, are you making a prediction here?
that would be my bet. That would be my bet. But
Yeah.
Apple, you could see Apple getting in that game as well. I don't think either of them would be stopped from a regulatory standpoint. It'd be hard for Google to buy them. It would be hard for Amazon to buy them. Meta, it's an almost $1 trillion company. Nvidia, it's a $1 trillion company. Netflix's big problem is hubris. They refused to get into the advertising business until it was far too late, and now they can't get it started. And while they're putting off some free cash flow now, they're going to have a hard time, surviving as a standalone business in the face of Apple and Google and Amazon for the next 20 years. TikTok, is protected by the Chinese government, so it's a little hard to understand exactly how that enterprise runs. But even they, while a very successful platform, and by the way, one that I really love, I enjoy my time on TikTok a lot. I just don't know that. I mean, their cost for acquisition, they spend a lot of money on marketing, and they're trying to get into shopping now. They're experimenting with a paid product, and 60% of the advertising in the United States, 60% of all advertising in the United States goes to Google, Meta, and Amazon. Those 3 companies. Yeah. About 6% goes to TikTok. And so, Yeah, I think TikTok is a very important part of the media ecosystem, but you can also see that unless, first of all, they're going to get regulated at some point, and how that works and what the impact of that is, I'm not exactly sure, but someone's going to crack down on that. Not put them out of business, but force them to move, a lot of their enterprise to North America, or prohibit them from operating here. And there's lots of good reasons for that. So, it'll be interesting to watch them happen. But relative to the whole, TikTok is still pretty insignificant, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
And you could see, someone buying them, and ByteDance finally just offloading them to get rid of the headache, because it is a headache. The culture there is toxic. They rotate employees like people change their underwear. It's kind of crazy. Everyone's unhappy. And there's every month there's a new controversy with a government somewhere in the world that eventually has to stop being fun for them. So I could see that going away, but it is really important to scale the relative size of these enterprises, to the overall total addressable market and total addressable revenue that's available on the planet.
You spoke about TikTok Shop, and I have a theory, and I'll pull that theory up post production. That the ads market today, if you want to be a full stack ad player today, it's not possible in the post Apple iOS privacy world. It's not possible to exist, or it's not possible to succeed without getting access to purchase data, right? And to that end, everyone's trying to build that flywheel of having a consumer engagement platform, or video, etc., an ads backend, of course, and then purchase data. So if you look at Amazon, they already are have all the purchase data in the world that they need, and they're now trying to build an upper funnel solution with Freebie and Prime Video, etc. They're fairly strongly positioned to have the full stack.
Oh yeah.
TikTok's obviously fledgling, but they're trying to build a full stack. Meta and Google do not have access to purchase data, so some of their advertising businesses are actually impacted in the long term if they don't start doing collaborations, etc., and start getting some
Oh, but
access to
that's
purchase
that's
data.
where Google's clean room comes into play. So you suddenly can mix. So they're going to the advertisers rather than purchasing the data. They're going to their. I mean, they're the biggest ad platform on the face of the earth. They're going to their advertisers and they're saying, "All right, we'll give you access to all of our data, but you put your data in a clean room, so it's totally anonymized, and then we'll make sure that you're getting advanced audience targeting that is unparalleled based on the amount of data we have." I think
But the
that's
purchase data in the world is available. The most of the purchase data in the world is available not with the advertisers but with the retailers. So you need the data about people shopping there to basically
yeah.
say, Evan
That's
purchased this
that's
the
where
last six
that's
months
why
or the last 12
Amazon
months.
and that's why I say Amazon is really just going to be a monster. They're the fastest growing app platform on the planet Earth. Almost all of it is retail media now, but they're now getting into these other mainstream advertising
Yeah,
platforms, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
cool. I know we're at the end of our time, but I have to ask you. I know this is one of your favorite topics about what's happening at X. So, and I want you to try and do as objective as possible. So here's somebody landed here from Mars. This is what they'd see, right? They'd see a platform that was de facto a reasonably good platform for people to engage with, but making no money. Completely a complete failure in terms of advertising revenue, which has then been taken over, and 75% headcount cuts, dramatic changes, which I don't think has become a better platform from a consumer standpoint, and neither has it, and it's definitely crashed in terms of being an advertiser platform. So, and now they're trying to make this a subscription platform. I don't know where they're going with it, but do- what's your $44 billion paid for whatever it's worth now, 10 8 $10 billion? Where do you see this going from here?
I mean, I think people overestimated Elon Musk's genius. He didn't. He got kicked out of PayPal and got paid off to leave by Peter Thiel. He did not found Tesla. He bought Tesla. He did not found SpaceX. He bought SpaceX. both Tesla and SpaceX have been funded by the taxpayer and his ability to make deals with the government. Now, he's a great negotiator, but as a tech genius, it's just not true. It's a fallacy, and you're seeing both. You're seeing the chickens come home to roost, both at Tesla, which just slashed its prices, and X. And so I think this belief in the strongman CEO, in the hyper genius of one man to be able to change tremendous things by dint of the force of their own personality, is an irrational ethos that American capitalism has bought into over the last number of years, that we continually see, whether it's Bob Iger coming back out of retirement. We can go down the long list of disappointing old white men who eventually run out of ideas, right? And, crucially with Twitter, he kind of didn't want to buy it and then kind of accidentally forced himself to do it. And now he's running it, almost entirely on a whim-based, process that is driving everyone who works there nuts, and is going to crush the thing under its own weight, which is a real shame, because if there was ever a time that Twitter was needed, it's the war in Gaza. It's the war in the Ukraine. It's the next upcoming election. The public square that I loved Twitter for, even though it was unprofitable and unsuccessful, it at least wasn't burning cash the way that he's doing now. It was not sustainable, but it wasn't going to die. And I missed that public square probably more than most, because it was my home. That was the center of my news. That was my news feed, Twitter. And because he wanted to show the world how big his penis was, he decided that he needed to control the town square. And what you're seeing is, when you allow malignant narcissists to go unchecked, they destroy things. Not sometimes, not most of the time, but pretty much 100% of the time.
The other thing that you could learn from this is that even if you accept the fact that he is a tech genius, a tech genius is not what's required to get advertisers in, and definitely not what's required to figure out censorship.
I know, but it's not like Mark Zuckerberg is the most charming person on the face of the earth, right? It's not like he's a great ad salesperson. He doesn't do that.
No, but that's
Elon Musk making Mark Zuckerberg look like the nicest guy on the face of the earth. And look at the trajectory of their two valuations since Elon Musk took over Twitter. Meta has almost doubled in value. And Fidelity just wrote down 65% of the valuation of Twitter. Mark Zuckerberg I'm not a fan of his in any way, shape, or form. But if you can force the world to side with Mark Zuckerberg over you, you must be fucking awful.
All right, that was great. That's probably what I wanted. So we play this last segment called Crystal Ball, and all you need to do is say true or false. It's a bunch of 10 questions about 10 statements about the future, and all we want to know whether you think it's true or false. Of course, if you want to say why, you can add it, but you're not obligated to. So, first, Google and Facebook will move below 40% market share this decade.
The combination of them in advertising?
Globally, they're about 48 or they're about 50 now.
I think that's true, and I think it's at the hands of a combination of Apple and Amazon.
All right. Jeff Bezos will make a comeback.
Not at Amazon. He might do something else, but not at Amazon. False.
The US will see a new president in Jan 2025.
False.
Yeah, both actors seem to be old folks. This is something I wanted to ask you as a crossover between where I come from and where you work in the movie industry. A Bollywood movie will become a mainstream hit in the US this decade.
Unfortunately, I think that's false. For some reason, those films don't cross over the way, let's say, South Korean content. I made a Bollywood movie, over a decade ago, and I expected this huge wave of content to come over here.
What was this movie? I did not know about it.
Called Bollywood Hero with Chris Kattan. Made it in Mumbai, and it was in 2008 actually. And I expected this big wave of Indian content to come over, and it never came to fruition. I'm not exactly sure why. I think part of it is because I don't think the Indian companies know how to export their content incredibly well to the US. But for some reason, there seems to be a chasm between Bollywood and Hollywood that can't be breached. So I would love for it to happen, but I don't think it will.
I think we know the answer to this, but I have it here, so I'm going to ask you. Netflix will be acquired in the next 5 years.
100% true.
Yeah, and these are just questions outside of the scope of advertising, but climate change will adversely impact the emerging market story. I know you've been bullish on Africa and Asia, etc., but do you
Yeah,
think
no,
climate change is a big?
yes. I mean, access to fresh water, access to, food. Yeah, I don't know what the time frame for that is, but yes, it's unfortunately probably true.
All right, the last one, the US dollar remains the reserve currency of the world in 2040.
I think that's false.
Okay, that's also a big statement. Cool. Okay, we are at the end of this podcast. Evan, it was an absolute pleasure having you here.
Great. Thanks for having me.